The Hawaiian sun felt like a warm embrace as I stepped off the plane, my skin still tingling from 2 weeks of pure vacation bliss. I'm Damon Richardson, and let me tell you, those 14 days at the Maui Grand Resort were exactly what I needed after 6 months of dealing with homeowners association drama in Riverstone Heights. Being the HOA president isn't exactly a glamorous job, but somebody's got to keep these suburban warriors in line. I adjusted my button-up shirt and grabbed my luggage, already planning my first real meal back home. The resort food was incredible, but nothing beats your own kitchen after being away. My house on Elmridge Drive had been calling my name for days, that perfect little 2-story colonial I'd worked my ass off to afford. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a backyard that was my personal sanctuary. The Uber driver was chatty, asking about my vacation while navigating through the familiar streets of my neighborhood. I half listened, my mind already shifting back into HOA mode. Mrs. Patterson probably had 17 complaints about her neighbor's garden gnomes. The Johnsons were likely still fighting about their fence height. And don't get me started on the ongoing battle over holiday decorations in July. But as we turned onto my street, something felt off. There were too many cars in my driveway, way too many. A beat-up minivan, an old sedan that looked like it had seen better decades, and what appeared to be a pickup truck with more rust than metal. My perfectly manicured lawn had toys scattered across it like a tornado had hit a daycare center. "You sure this is the right address?" the driver asked, squinting at the house numbers. "Unfortunately, yes," I muttered, my vacation zen evaporating faster than morning dew. I paid the fare and stood there for a moment, luggage in hand, trying to process what I was seeing. Through my front window, front window, I could see the flickering glow of a television and the silhouettes of people moving around. Lots of people. People who definitely weren't supposed to be in my house. My first thought was break-in. My second thought was squatters. My third thought was much less charitable and involved several words that would make my grandmother wash my mouth out with soap. But I'm a civilized man, an HOA president, a pillar of the community. I don't just go charging into situations without thinking them through. So I walked up to my own front door, past the scattered toys, past the dying plants that someone had clearly been neglecting, past the pile of newspapers that suggested these folks had been here a while, and I knocked. On my own damn door. The sound of footsteps approached, and I straightened my shoulders, preparing for whatever conversation was about to happen. The door swung open, and I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Speak to the Manager starter pack. She was somewhere in her 50s, blonde hair teased into a style that defied both gravity and good taste, wearing a green tracksuit that had seen better years. Her face immediately twisted into an expression of disgust and suspicion, like I was selling something she definitely wasn't buying. "Can I help you?" she said, her voice dripping with the kind of entitlement that made my teeth itch. I blinked, actually blinked. Here I was, standing at my own front door, being asked if I needed help by someone who was apparently living in my house. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "This is my house. I'm Damon Richardson, and I live here." Her eyes narrowed, and she actually had the audacity to look me up and down like I was lying. Like I was some random person who just picked a house at random to claim ownership of. "I don't think so," she said, crossing her arms. "We've been living here for 3 weeks. Nice try, though." 3 weeks, 3 weeks. These people had been living in my house for 3 weeks while I was sipping Mai Tais and getting massages in paradise. The woman, who I would soon learn was named Brenda Kowalski, stood in my doorway like she was guarding Fort Knox instead of my own damn house. Behind her, I could hear the sounds of domestic chaos. A television blaring cartoons, children's voices, and what sounded like someone rummaging through kitchen cabinets. "Look," I said, setting down my luggage and pulling out my phone. "I can show you my mortgage statements, my property taxes, hell, I can show you pictures of me painting these walls last spring. This is definitely my house." Brenda's face scrunched up like she'd tasted something sour. "Anyone can fake documents these days. Do you have any idea how many scam artists try to pull this kind of thing? I wasn't born yesterday." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who had somehow moved into my house, claiming I was the scammer. It was like reality had taken a left turn into the Twilight Zone. "Ma'am," I said, my HOA president voice kicking in, calm, authoritative, the voice I used when Mrs. Henderson tried to paint her shutters neon pink. I need you to step aside so I can enter my home. Your home, she laughed, a harsh sound that made my neighbor's dog start barking. This is OUR home now. We have tenant rights. You can't just show up here and harass us. Tenant rights? This woman thought she was a tenant, in my house, without ever meeting me, signing a lease, or apparently paying any rent. From behind her, I heard a child's voice. Mom, who's the man at the door? Nobody important, Tyler. Just go back to your coloring. Nobody important. I'm standing at my own front door, and I'm nobody important. Listen, Brenda. How do you know my name? She snapped, her eyes going wide with suspicion. I paused. How did I know her name? I honestly wasn't sure. Maybe I'd heard one of the kids say it, or maybe my brain was just filling in blanks with the most Karen-esque name possible. Lucky guess, I said. Look, I don't know how you ended up in my house, but this is clearly a misunderstanding. If someone told you this place was available for rent, they were lying to you. Oh, really? She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like text messages. Because Jeremy told us this place was perfect for our family. Said the owner was some rich guy who had tons of properties and wouldn't even notice. Jeremy? There was always a Jeremy. Who's Jeremy? I asked. My cousin's boyfriend's brother. He's in real estate. Of course he was. I was starting to piece together what had happened here. Some wannabe real estate scammer had convinced this family that my house was available, probably collected some kind of deposit or first month's rent, and disappeared into the wind, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. Brenda, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Jeremy scammed you. This is my house. I have the deed, the mortgage, the insurance policies. Prove it, she interrupted. So I did. I pulled out my phone and started showing her photos. Me standing in front of the house on the day I got the keys. Me planting the rose bushes that were now dying in the front yard. Me with the contractors who installed the deck last summer. She looked at each photo with increasing skepticism, like I had somehow photoshopped myself into an elaborate multi-year hoax. These could be anyone's pictures, she said finally. You could have stolen them from social media. The woman was committed to her delusion. I had to give her that. Okay, I said, then let's call the police. They can sort this out. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. The police? Are you threatening me? Help, help, this man is threatening me. She started yelling at the top of her lungs, and within seconds, I could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Mrs. Chen from across the street opened her door and peered out. The Garcia's teenage son started recording with his phone from their driveway. I'm not threatening anyone, I called out, raising my hands. This is my house. I just got back from vacation, and these people are living in my house. But Brenda was already on her phone, dialing 911. Hello? Yes, I need police immediately. There's a strange man at my door claiming he owns my house. He's being very aggressive and threatening my children. Aggressive? I was standing there with my vacation luggage, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts, being about as aggressive as a golden retriever. But as I looked at Brenda's face, red with righteous indignation, eyes blazing with the certainty of someone who had never been wrong about anything in her life, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be simple. Within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up to my house. My house, which I was apparently no longer allowed to enter without being accused of home invasion. Officer Martinez and Officer Thompson stepped out, both looking like they'd rather be dealing with literally anything else. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Martinez asked, her notepad already out. Brenda immediately launched into her victim narrative. This man, she said, pointing at me like I was carrying a machete instead of luggage, showed up at MY house claiming he owns it. He's harassing me and my children, making threats. What threats? I interrupted. I asked to come into my own house. See, he admits it. He's trying to break into our home. Officer Thompson, a tall guy who looked like he'd heard every ridiculous story in the book, turned to me. Sir, do you have identification and proof of residence? Finally, someone speaking sense. I pulled out my wallet and handed over my driver's license, then started scrolling through my phone for property documents. This address matches, Officer Martinez confirmed, looking at my ID. And you have documentation. I showed them everything. Property deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, insurance documents, even my Amazon delivery history showing packages delivered to this address for the past 3 years. Officer Thompson examined the documents while Brenda huffed and puffed behind him. "These look legitimate," he said finally. "Of course they look legitimate," Brenda exploded. "That's what makes it such a good scam. These people are getting more sophisticated." Officer Martinez turned to her. "Ma'am, do you have a lease agreement, rental contract, any documentation showing you have legal right to be in this house?" The silence stretched for several seconds, long enough for me to realize that Brenda was about to make this even more complicated. "We don't need documentation," she said finally. "We have squatters' rights. We've been living here for 3 weeks, maintaining the property, paying the utilities." "You've been paying my utilities?" I asked. "Well, no. The lights were already on when we moved in." Officer Martinez and I exchanged a look. She was clearly thinking the same thing I was. This woman was either delusional or the world's most confident con artist. "Ma'am," Officer Thompson said patiently, "squatters' rights require years of occupation, not weeks, and they don't apply when the legal owner is simply away on vacation." "How do we know he was on vacation? How do we know he didn't abandon this property?" I pulled out my phone again and showed them my resort booking, my flight confirmations, even selfies from the beach with timestamps. "Sir," Officer Martinez said, "this appears to be a straightforward case of trespassing. These people are in your house without permission." Thank you, I thought. Finally, someone with common sense. But Brenda wasn't done, not by a long shot. "This is discrimination," she suddenly shouted. "You're taking his side because you're all in on it together. This is a conspiracy against white families." And there it was, the race card played with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Officer Thompson, who happened to be black himself, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this has nothing to do with race. This is about property law." "Oh, really? You don't think it's suspicious that this person just happens to show up right when we're getting settled? You don't think someone called him and told him to come here?" The officers were clearly getting tired of Brenda's theatrics, but they had to follow protocol. Officer Martinez turned back to me. "Mr. Richardson, as the property owner, you have the right to ask these people to leave. If they refuse, we can arrest them for trespassing." "I'm asking them to leave," I said. "We're not going anywhere," Brenda declared. "This is our home now," Jeremy said. "Ma'am," Officer Thompson interrupted, "Jeremy doesn't own this house. Mr. Richardson does. You need to gather your belongings and leave, or you'll be arrested." That's when things got really interesting. Brenda's face went through several shades of red before settling on a deep purple that made me worry about her blood pressure. "Fine," she screamed. "Fine, but you haven't heard the last of Brenda Kowalski. I know people, important people. You can't just throw a family out on the street because some, she struggled for words that wouldn't get her arrested. "Property owner wants to use his property," I suggested helpfully. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't over." And somehow I believed her. As it turned out, Brenda Kowalski didn't travel light. What I had initially assumed was a simple case of mistaken occupancy was revealed to be a full-scale colonization effort. The woman had moved her entire extended family into my house like it was some kind of refugee camp for the chronically entitled. While the officers supervised, a parade of Kowalskis began emerging from various rooms of my house. First came Tyler, the kid I'd heard earlier, a round-faced 10-year-old wearing a Superman shirt that had seen better decades. He was clutching a coloring book and regarding me with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for vegetables. "Who's that guy, Mom?" he asked, pointing at me. "Nobody important, baby. Just someone who thinks he can push us around." Nobody important. I was really starting to hate that phrase. Next came Brandon, Tyler's older brother, a surly teenager with the kind of attitude that suggested he'd been raised on a steady diet of entitlement and energy drinks. He was carrying a gaming console and looked personally offended that his setup was being disrupted. "This is bogus," he muttered. "We just got the Wi-Fi password figured out." My Wi-Fi password? They'd been using my internet for 3 weeks. Then came the adults. Brenda's sister, Cindy, emerged from what I now realized was my master bedroom, carrying 2 suitcases and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "I told you this was a bad idea," she whispered to Brenda. Shut up, Cindy. Jeremy said this was legitimate. Behind Cindy came her husband, Ron, a man who appeared to be constructed entirely of beer belly and poor life choices. He was wearing a stained tank top and carrying what looked like my good scotch. "Is that my Macallan 18? I asked, pointing at the bottle. Ron looked down at it like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Oh, this? Yeah, it was just sitting there. Figured nobody wanted it." "Nobody wanted my $400 bottle of scotch." "Sure." "Put it down," Officer Martinez ordered. Ron reluctantly set the bottle on my porch railing, where it joined what was becoming quite a collection of my belongings that the Kowalskis had apparently decided were communal property. The parade continued. Brenda's nephew, Jeremy Jr., not to be confused with the Jeremy who'd apparently orchestrated this whole situation, came out carrying an armload of what looked like my books. Behind him was his girlfriend, Ashley, who was inexplicably carrying my coffee maker. "Why do you have my coffee maker?" I asked. "It makes better coffee than ours," she said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable explanation. Officer Thompson was furiously taking notes, probably for what was going to be the most entertaining police report of his career. But the real prize was the last person to emerge. Brenda's father, Earl, a man who appeared to be roughly 80% mustache and 20% resentment. He shuffled out of my house wearing my favorite robe, my good robe, the one I'd bought myself for Christmas, and looking like he owned the place. "What's all this racket about?" he demanded. "Grandpa Earl, we have to leave," Tyler explained. "Leave? We just got here. I finally got my stories figured out on that TV." My TV, my cable subscription, my Netflix account that he'd probably spent 3 weeks binge-watching. "Sir," Officer Martinez addressed Earl, "you need to remove that robe and leave the premises." Earl looked down at himself like he'd forgotten what he was wearing. "This old thing, I found it in the closet. Nobody was using it." "Because I was on vacation," I exploded. "These are my things. This is my house. You can't just move in and start using everything like it's a hotel." "Well, I never," Earl huffed. "In my day, we respected our elders." "In your day, people didn't break into other people's houses," I shot back. That's when Brenda decided to escalate things to a whole new level of ridiculous. "Officers," she said, her voice taking on a theatrical quality that would have made Shakespeare cringe, "I want to file a complaint against this man for harassment, intimidation, and racial intimidation." "Racial intimidation?" Officer Thompson asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. "He's clearly targeting us because we're white. This is obviously some kind of reverse discrimination scheme." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear Mrs. Chen's wind chimes 3 houses down. Officer Martinez slowly closed her notepad. "Ma'am, you were illegally occupying this man's house. He has every right to ask you to leave. Race has nothing to do with it." "That's what they want you to think," Brenda said, nodding sagely like she'd uncovered some great conspiracy. "But I know what's really going on here. This is part of that whole agenda." "What agenda would that be?" I asked, genuinely curious about what rabbit hole her mind had disappeared down. "You know," she said, waving her hand vaguely. "The agenda, taking houses from hardworking American families and giving them to people." People, she couldn't even say it directly, but the implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Officer Thompson, who had clearly reached his limit, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and vacate the premises, or you'll be arrested for trespassing. This is your final warning." Brenda looked around at her assembled family, probably calculating whether she had enough moral support for one last stand. But even the Kowalskis seemed to realize that the jig was up. "Fine," she said finally, "but this isn't over. I'm calling my lawyer." Somehow, I doubted Brenda Kowalski had a lawyer. But I was about to learn that what she lacked in legal representation, she more than made up for in pure, concentrated crazy. The Kowalski exodus took longer than a NASA shuttle launch and was significantly less organized. As the family grudgingly gathered their belongings from various corners of my house, I got my first real look at what 3 weeks of occupation had done to my previously pristine home. My living room looked like a tornado had mated with a garage sale. Tyler's coloring books and crayons were scattered across my hardwood floors, along with what appeared to be every snack food known to mankind. My leather couch, My beautiful, expensive leather couch that I'd saved 6 months to buy had mysterious stains and what looked like permanent indentations from where Earl had apparently made it his throne. The kitchen was worse. My granite countertops were covered in a layer of crumbs that suggested the Kowalskis had never heard of a thing called cleaning up after yourself. The sink was full of dishes that looked like they'd been there since the Clinton administration, and my refrigerator was completely empty except for a single slice of pizza that appeared to be developing its own ecosystem. Jesus, I muttered, surveying the damage. Language, Brenda scolded, as if she had any moral authority left after turning my house into a frat house. Officer Martinez was documenting everything with her phone, probably for the property damage report I was definitely going to file. Officer Thompson was supervising the removal of what appeared to be half of Walmart's inventory from my bedroom. But the real entertainment was watching the Kowalskis try to explain why they had so much of my stuff mixed in with their belongings. "That's not yours," I said as Ashley tried to walk past with my blender. "Yes, it is. We brought this. It's a Vitamix 750. It cost me $600. You brought that." Ashley looked at the blender like it might testify against her. "Well, we brought a blender." "Where is it?" "In storage." "Where's your storage unit?" "We don't have one." This conversation was repeated roughly 30 times with various items. My good towels, we brought towels. My coffee table, that looks like our coffee table. My actual coffee, we bought coffee. And my kitchen knives, those are definitely our knives. But the real showstopper came when Ron tried to walk out with my 65-inch TV. "Absolutely not," I said, blocking his path. "Come on, man, we've been watching this for weeks. We're attached to it now." "You're attached to my TV. It's got all our shows saved on it. My shows, my Netflix account, my cable DVR with my recorded programs." "Sir," Officer Thompson intervened, "put the TV down." Ron reluctantly set it down, but not before muttering something about how some people don't know how to share. Throughout this entire circus, Brenda maintained a running commentary that was equal parts victim complex and racial conspiracy theory. "This is exactly what I expected," she announced to no one in particular. "They stick together, you know, the officers, the homeowner, probably half the neighborhood. They all want us gone." "Because you're trespassing," Officer Martinez pointed out. "That's what they're calling it now," Brenda said, nodding knowingly. "But I know persecution when I see it." Persecution. The woman who had been living rent-free in my house for 3 weeks was claiming persecution. But the real comedy gold came when Earl decided to make his final stand over my bathrobe. "I'm keeping this," he declared, clutching the robe like it was the Holy Grail. "Sir, that's not yours," Officer Thompson said. "Finders keepers. You didn't find it, you stole it from his closet. It was just hanging there. In his closet in his house that he owns." Earl considered this logic for a moment, then shook his head. "Well, he was gone. Abandonment laws." "There are no abandonment laws for vacation robes," I said. "Says who?" "Says reality." In the end, it took Officer Martinez physically removing the robe from Earl's shoulders while he muttered about government overreach and property rights, apparently unaware of the irony. But Brenda wasn't done, not by a long shot. As her family loaded their legitimate belongings into their caravan of questionable vehicles, she turned to me with the kind of look that suggested she was about to say something that would haunt my dreams. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice low and threatening. "But I know who you are now, Damon Richardson. I know where you live." "You literally lived here for 3 weeks," I pointed out. "And I know where you work, HOA president of Riverstone Heights, right?" How did she know that? Had she been going through my mail, my files? "That's right," she continued, seeing my expression. "I did my research, and I know all about HOA presidents. You people think you run everything, think you can push families around, think you can discriminate." "Ma'am," Officer Thompson interrupted, "you need to move along." "Oh, I'm moving along," Brenda said, climbing into her minivan. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot. You haven't seen the last of Brenda Kowalski." As the convoy of Kowalski vehicles finally pulled away from my house, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because I finally had my house back. Apprehension because something in Brenda's tone suggested this was just the beginning of my problems. Officer Martinez handed me her card. You'll want to change all your locks, your passwords, your security codes, everything, and document all the damage for insurance purposes. You think she'll be back? I asked. Officer Thompson and Officer Martinez exchanged a look. Let's just say, Officer Martinez replied, you might want to invest in a good security system. As I watched their patrol cars disappear down Elmridge Drive, I stood in the doorway of my reclaimed house and tried to process what had just happened. 3 weeks ago, I'd left for a peaceful vacation. Now I was apparently in some kind of war with a woman who thought racial conspiracy theories were an appropriate response to being caught trespassing. I had no idea that Brenda Kowalski was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, and it felt like the most luxurious hotel room in the world. Even with the lingering smell of whatever the Kowalskis had been cooking, I was pretty sure it involved fish sticks and poor life choices. It was good to be home. I'd spent most of the previous evening documenting damage, changing locks, and calling my insurance company to explain why I needed to file a claim for family of strangers lived in my house while I was on vacation. That was a fun conversation. But as I sat on my porch with my morning coffee, in my own coffee mug, made with my own coffee maker that I'd had to wrestle back from Ashley, I noticed something odd. There was a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. A beat-up sedan with someone sitting in the driver's seat. Someone who looked suspiciously like they were watching my house. I squinted, trying to get a better look, and my blood pressure spiked. It was Ron, Brenda's brother-in-law, just sitting there staring at my house like he was conducting some kind of surveillance operation. Great, the Kowalskis were escalating to stalking. I was debating whether to call the police again when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Hello? Is this Damon Richardson? The voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of smugness. Who's asking? This is attorney Bradford Pemsworth of Pemsworth, Kellerman, and Associates. I represent Mrs. Brenda Kowalski in the matter of her illegal eviction from 412 Elmridge Drive. I blinked. Brenda actually had a lawyer, and apparently in her version of events, she'd been illegally evicted from my house. Mr. Pemsworth, I said, trying to keep my voice level, there was no eviction, legal or otherwise. Mrs. Kowalski was trespassing in my house. That's not how my client tells it, Pemsworth replied smoothly. According to Mrs. Kowalski, she entered into a verbal rental agreement with an authorized agent of yours, paid first month's rent and a security deposit, and was residing legally in the property when you arrived and had her forcibly removed by police. What authorized agent? What rental agreement? What rent and deposit? A Mr. Jeremy Kowalski, who she was told was your property manager. Jeremy Kowalski, of course. The mysterious Jeremy wasn't just some random scammer, he was family. This was starting to make a twisted kind of sense. Mr. Pemsworth, I said, Jeremy Kowalski is Brenda's cousin's boyfriend's brother. He's not my property manager. I don't have a property manager. I've never heard of Jeremy Kowalski, and I certainly never authorized him to rent out my house while I was on vacation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Do you have documentation proving that Jeremy Kowalski was not authorized to act on your behalf? Do I have documentation proving a negative? No, I don't have a notarized letter saying Jeremy Kowalski is not authorized to rent my house. That's not how property ownership works. Nevertheless, Pemsworth continued, undeterred by logic, my client suffered damages as a result of your actions. Emotional distress, moving expenses, temporary housing costs. She was living in my house without permission. Allegedly. Allegedly, this lawyer was actually going to make me prove that I owned my own house. Mr. Pemsworth, I have the deed, the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the utility bills. Documents can be forged, he interrupted. What my client experienced was racial harassment and discrimination. She was targeted specifically because she's white, and you used your position as HOA president to orchestrate her removal. And there it was, the race card now with legal representation. That's ridiculous, I said. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with the fact that she was living in my house without permission. We'll let a jury decide that, Pemsworth said smoothly. My client is prepared to file suit for discrimination, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of her civil rights under the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act. They were going to claim that evicting someone from illegally occupying your house was a Fair Housing Act violation. Mr. Pemsworth, I said, with all due respect, your client doesn't have a case. She was trespassing. The police confirmed it. She has no legal standing. That's your opinion. My client disagrees. She'll be seeking damages in the amount of $50,000. $50,000 for being asked to leave my own house. And if you think this will just go away, Pemsworth continued, you're mistaken. Mrs. Kowalski is prepared to take this to court, to the media, to anyone who will listen. She's already contacted Channel 7 News about her story. Channel 7 News? Of course she had. After I hung up with Attorney Pemsworth, and seriously, what kind of parent names their kid Bradford? I sat on my porch trying to process what was happening. Brenda Kowalski wasn't just crazy, she was organized crazy. Crazy with legal representation and a media strategy. That's when I noticed that Ron was no longer the only one watching my house. There was now a Channel 7 News van parked down the street, and a reporter with perfectly styled hair was doing what looked like a stand-up report while gesturing toward my house. My house was apparently about to become the centerpiece of a news story about racial discrimination, a story in which I was the villain. I was still processing this when my phone rang again. This time it was my HOA vice president, Margaret Chen. Damon, she said without preamble, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from some reporter asking about discrimination complaints against you. It's a long story, Margaret. Well, you better make it a short story, because the HOA board is getting nervous. The last thing we need is negative publicity. So I gave Margaret the abbreviated version. Vacation, house invasion, eviction, lawsuit threat, media circus. Jesus, Damon, this woman sounds unhinged. She is unhinged, but she's unhinged with a lawyer and a news crew. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I could fight this in court, spend thousands on legal fees and hope that sanity prevailed. I could try to ignore it and hope it went away. Or I could remember that I wasn't just Damon Richardson, ordinary homeowner. I was Damon Richardson, HOA president. And if there was one thing I'd learned in 6 months of dealing with suburban drama, it was that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Brenda Kowalski wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. I had resources she didn't know about, connections she couldn't imagine, and a level of petty determination that came from years of dealing with people who thought rules didn't apply to them. Game on, Brenda, game on. It took me exactly 3 hours to realize that Brenda Kowalski had made one crucial mistake in her war against me. She'd forgotten that HOA presidents are professional grudge holders with access to city records, neighbor networks, and an almost supernatural ability to make life complicated for people who annoy them. While she was busy giving interviews to Channel 7 about her traumatic eviction experience and clear case of racial discrimination, I was making phone calls. Lots of phone calls. The first call was to my buddy Marcus at the city planning office. Marcus owed me a favor from when I'd helped expedite his pool permit last year. Damon, what can I do for you? I need you to run an address for me, 1247 Oakwood Terrace. I want to know about permits, violations, complaints, anything you've got. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Marcus called back with a treasure trove of information. Apparently, 1247 Oakwood Terrace, the Kowalski family residence, was a code enforcement officer's nightmare. Unpermitted additions, violations for excessive junk in the yard, complaints about noise, and 3 separate citations for running an unlicensed auto repair business out of their garage. Thanks, Marcus, I owe you dinner. Just returning the favor, my friend. My second call was to Detective Sarah Williams at the police department. Sarah and I had worked together on several HOA security issues, and she'd always been straight with me. Sarah, I need to ask you about something off the record. Yesterday's incident at my house. Officer Martinez and Thompson responded. Yeah, I heard about that. Crazy situation. What do you need? The woman, Brenda Kowalski, has her name come up in your system before. There was a pause. I can't give you details, but Let's just say yesterday wasn't her first interaction with law enforcement. Interesting, very interesting. My third call was to Janet Morrison, president of the Oakwood Terrace HOA, the neighborhood where the Kowalskis actually lived. Janet and I served on the regional HOA council together, and we'd always gotten along well. Janet, this is Damon Richardson from Riverstone Heights. I need to ask you about one of your residents. If it's about Brenda Kowalski, I was wondering when you'd call. You know about what happened? Honey, the whole neighborhood knows. She's been telling anyone who will listen that she was discriminated against by some HOA president. Took me about 5 minutes to figure out it was you. What can you tell me about her? Janet's sigh was audible through the phone. Where do I start? She's been a thorn in our side for 2 years. Constant complaints, accusations, conspiracy theories. She's convinced that the HOA board is discriminating against her because she's white, which is hilarious since our entire board is white except for me, and I'm Asian. What kind of complaints? Everything. The mailman is part of a conspiracy because he delivers her mail at different times. Her neighbors are discriminating against her because they don't invite her to block parties. The city is targeting her family because they keep getting code violations, which, by the way, they deserve every single one of. This was getting better and better. Janet, I need a favor. Can you send me copies of any formal complaints she's filed with your HOA? Absolutely. Fair warning, though, there are a lot of them. My fourth call was to my insurance agent, Beverly Kim. Bev, it's Damon. I filed that claim yesterday about the property damage. Right, the house squatters situation. Unusual claim, but we're processing it. I need to know if Brenda Kowalski has filed any claims against my policy. She's threatening to sue for discrimination. Let me check. No, nothing yet. But Damon, if she does file a lawsuit, you need to notify us immediately, and you might want to consider getting an attorney. Already on it. My fifth call was to the best attorney I knew, my sister Linda, who specialized in civil rights law and had never lost a discrimination case. Linda, I need your help, and before you ask, yes, I'm willing to pay your full rate. This must be serious. What's going on? I gave Linda the full story, from vacation to invasion to lawsuit threat. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Damon, this woman doesn't have a case. What she's describing isn't discrimination, it's trespassing. The Fair Housing Act doesn't protect people who illegally occupy someone else's property. Tell that to Bradford Pemsworth. Oh God, you got Pemsworth. That man couldn't win a case if the opposing attorney was a golden retriever. He's been sanctioned by the bar twice for frivolous lawsuits. Even better. Linda, I don't just want to defend against this. I want to go on offense. What did you have in mind? Harassment, stalking, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to commit fraud. How many causes of action can we pile on? Linda laughed. I like the way you think. Let me do some research and I'll get back to you. By the time I finished my phone calls, I had a complete picture of exactly who Brenda Kowalski was. She wasn't just a woman who'd made an honest mistake. She was a serial complainer, a habitual victim, and quite possibly a scammer who'd done this before. That evening, as I sat in my reclaimed living room, I started putting together what I like to call the Kowalski file. 23 pages of code violations, HOA complaints, police reports, and documented incidents of harassment against neighbors, service workers, and local businesses. The woman had filed discrimination complaints against a pizza delivery driver for being suspiciously ethnic, a bank teller for asking for ID, her children's school for having too many diversity programs, and the local grocery store for not having enough American flags in their produce section. Brenda Kowalski wasn't a victim of discrimination. She was a professional victim who used accusations of discrimination as a weapon against anyone who didn't give her exactly what she wanted. The next morning, I was awakened by my doorbell ringing at 6 a.m. I stumbled to the door, expecting maybe a delivery or an emergency. Instead, I found Channel 7 reporter Ashley Chang and her cameraman standing on my porch. Mr. Richardson, I'm Ashley Chang from Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your side of the story regarding the discrimination allegations made by Brenda Kowalski. I looked at the camera, then at Ashley, then back at the camera. I was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that said World's Okayest HOA President. My hair was doing things that defied physics, and I hadn't had coffee yet. Perfect. You want my side of the story? I asked. Yes, sir. My side is that I went on vacation for 2 weeks, came home, and found strangers living in my house. When I asked them to leave, they claimed I was discriminating against them. That's my side. But Mrs. Kowalski says she had a rental agreement with Jeremy, who is her cousin's boyfriend's brother, and has never worked for me in any capacity. She was scammed by her own family member and decided it was my fault. Ashley looked slightly taken aback. Apparently, she'd expected me to either refuse to comment or get defensive. Mrs. Kowalski also claims that you used your position as HOA president to have her removed. I used my position as the homeowner to have trespassers removed from my property. The fact that I'm also an HOA president is irrelevant. But she says, Ms. Chang, I interrupted, let me ask you something. If you came home from vacation and found strangers living in your house, eating your food, using your belongings, and when you asked them to leave they called you a racist, what would you do? The question hung in the air for a moment while Ashley processed it. I'd call the police. Which is exactly what I did. The police confirmed that these people had no legal right to be in my house and removed them. End of story. But the allegations of discrimination are false, completely, demonstrably false. And if Mrs. Kowalski wants to pursue this legally, she's welcome to do so. I have complete confidence that the truth will come out. After the news crew left, I called Linda. I just did a live TV interview in my pajamas, I told her. How'd that go? Pretty well, actually. I think I came across as reasonable and she comes across as crazy. Good, I've got some news for you. I did some digging on Jeremy Kowalski. And he's got a record. Fraud, identity theft, running rental scams. This isn't the first time he's convinced family members to move into houses they don't have permission to occupy. No way. I also found 3 other families who have been victimized by the same scam. Jeremy finds empty houses, tells relatives they're rental properties, collects money from them, and disappears when the real owners show up. The pieces were falling into place. Brenda wasn't just a victim of her cousin's scam, she was likely a willing participant. The righteous indignation, the discrimination claims, the media strategy, it was all designed to deflect attention from the fact that she'd knowingly participated in fraud. Linda, I want to file charges against all of them. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll start the paperwork. That afternoon, I got a call from Channel 7. The interview had aired during the noon news, and apparently it hadn't gone the way Brenda had hoped. Instead of a sympathetic portrayal of a family victimized by discrimination, the story had come across as a con artist getting caught and trying to play the victim. Mr. Richardson, this is Ashley Chang. I wanted to let you know that we've received some additional information about Mrs. Kowalski that we're investigating. What kind of information? Several of your neighbors called in with similar stories. Apparently, Mrs. Kowalski has made discrimination complaints against multiple people in your neighborhood over the years. Of course she had. We're also looking into her family's rental scam history. Would you be willing to do a follow-up interview? Absolutely. By the end of the week, the story had completely flipped. What started as Brenda's attempt to paint me as a racist HOA president had turned into an exposé of a family-run rental fraud operation. Jeremy Kowalski was arrested on outstanding warrants. Ron was cited for multiple code violations. Earl was evicted from his senior living facility for non-payment of rent. And Brenda found herself facing criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and harassment. Bradford Pemsworth dropped her as a client faster than a hot potato, probably realizing that representing her would be professional suicide. The final insult came when Janet Morrison called to tell me that the Oakwood Terrace HOA had voted to foreclose on the Kowalski house for unpaid dues and assessment violations. They're losing the house, I asked. Already lost it. Bank foreclosure went through yesterday. Turns out they haven't made a mortgage payment in 8 months. So the family that had tried to steal my house was losing their own house. There was a certain poetic justice to that. 3 months later, I was sitting in my backyard. enjoying a perfectly grilled steak and a glass of my recovered Macallan 18, when Margaret Chen called. "Damon, you're not going to believe this. Try me. Remember Brenda Kowalski? Hard to forget. She's running for city council." I nearly choked on my scotch. What? Campaign slogan is "Fighting discrimination in our community." She's positioning herself as a civil rights advocate. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who had illegally occupied my house, filed false discrimination charges, and run a rental scam was now running for public office on an anti-discrimination platform. "Margaret," I said, "I think I need to get more involved in local politics." "I was hoping you'd say that. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from the Brenda Kowalski experience, it was that sometimes crazy people need to be stopped before they can spread their crazy to a wider audience. And who better to stop them than someone who'd already beaten them once? The war with Brenda Kowalski might be over, but apparently the battle for the soul of Riverstone Heights was just beginning. Game on, Brenda, game on.